All right, so today's module is on advanced counterplans. We're going over a sort of list of counterplans and specific strategies regarding them. So first thing to talk about, PICs. Raise your hand if you're unfamiliar with the acronym PIC. PIC. Awesome. Someone tell me what it stands for. Yeah. Plan inclusive counterplans. Function of a PIC is to solve essentially all the F and then point out some minor difference and say that difference is them. Now, slight misnomer because no PIC should ever be entirely plan inclusive. You can't do the entirety of the affirmative, otherwise you're just affirming the resolution. So usually PIC is going to do almost all, but not all of whatever the affirmative suggests, and either remove something or change something about the affirmative. These are pretty strategic because it's going to be hard for them to leverage the affirmative against your offense if you say, I agree with you like 99% of the way, and then change one minor thing. So imagine, say, for whatever reason, the affirmative said on this topic, we will draft every single person 18 to 20 into the military. And you were to pick that said, we'll draft every single person except people with strong religious objections. Their offense was probably something like, we need troops to maintain a strong military, or something like that. And the minor difference between entire conscript army and like 99.5% of the population, except for people with strong religious objections, is going to be the difference between 99.5 and 100% solvency. So essentially very, very minimal. So if you gain some net benefit to the PIC, you can often outweigh it. PICs are also usually mutually exclusive with the affirmative, so permutations are often not a very strong option. Well, this permutation to do both is really strong, because if the counterplan is just the plan minus something, permutation due to the plan and the counterplan doesn't make a whole lot of sense. At best, that's just doing the affirmative, which is still linked to the harms because doing the entire affirmative would include whatever thing you're saying shouldn't be in there. Now, I think occasionally there's a strong argument for permutation due to the counterplan versus PICs. Anyone familiar with this argument or want to try to explain it? Permutation due to the counterplan. In the specific context, you read on, let's say, the average topic, just a whole res affirmative case, just like I affirm the resolution. Public colleges and universities ought not restrict any constitutional protected speech, or countries ought to prohibit nuclear power. And then they were to pick out of, say, one college or one country or something like that. Anyone think that's not competitive or want to argue why? All right, so supposing I would walk up to you and I was like, I think public colleges and universities ought not restrict any constitutionally protected speech. And you're like, okay, but there's this one specific place that should, like the United States Naval Academy. They should. Does that make the statement wrong? Come on, I know it's 9 a.m., but y'all at least have to interact. Right? No. All right. So here's the right. Yeah. Before. What do you mean?
Because a significant portion of colleges would not do this, so it would still apply to like a whole range of generic argument.
So you're saying the counterplan would still apply, or
like it would still fall under the
Okay, yeah. So I think this is the potential objection sometimes. Let's say you just said public colleges and universities ought not restrict any constitutionally protected speech. And you say, I'm not saying literally every public college and university. I'm saying public colleges and universities in general. And they get up and they say, every single college except for Governor State University should restrict constitutionally protected speech. Have they disagreed that on balance, a majority of colleges should? You're nodding yes. What is that? Well, so here's all colleges, and the app is saying a majority of these should have a restriction. The negative up and says, yes, a majority of those should have a restriction, except this specific one should not. The rest of these should. So exclude that one. it is still on balance affirming the resolution, right? And so I think this is a relatively strong objection at times, which is if the F wasn't saying literally every single one, case by case by case, ought to do this, but saying on balance a majority should, then a counterplan that just says on balance a majority should, except for this one shouldn't, hasn't actually disagreed with the affirmative. The affirmative claim wasn't that every single college in this group should, it was that most of them should. So in order for it to be competitive, the negative would have to say on balance most of these should not. And this is usually true in contexts where the resolution is referring to something generically or on balance. Now, that same topic had another term that wasn't at all generic or on balance, which was public colleges and universities ought not restrict any constitutionally protected speech. So supposing you have a pick out of one form of speech, you just say colleges should restrict hate speech, or colleges should restrict seditious speech, or whatever the counterplan may be. If the F said you can't restrict any speech in this area, and the neg said you can restrict this speech, is that competitive? Yeah. So here you have an example of a pick that would be competitive, even against a whole res F on that topic, which is counterplan restrict a specific form of speech, because the F is pretty clearly bound by the resolution to defend all forms of constitutional speech are unrestricted. So the way you'd phrase this argument in a debate round as the affirmative is perm do the counterplan. So a little bit distinct from a lot of the other permutation arguments, perm like perm do both, perm do the F and the counterplan, etc. This argument is essentially a challenge that's saying, I don't think your counterplan is different from my affirmative at all. And so the affirmative is challenging the negative that the counterplan and the plan are distinct from each other. And so what you're saying is, if we just did the counterplan, that would still affirm because that is my F. And so you object to that by saying perm to the counterplan and then presumably explain why you think they're the same. E.g., explain this argument from a second ago. And that would work. Or, I don't know, let's say the F said, in the United States, national service ought to be compulsory, and the right to advantage of the draft. And the negative said counterplan, in the United States, conscription ought to be compulsory. And that was their counterplan. Presumably a reasonably strong affirmative argument would be, that's actually not a different thing. We're just talking about the same thing. And so you would argue this counterplan is functionally no different from the affirmative. Clear on this? Okay. Usually I think picks are very strategic when you can win that they're competitive because they solve most of the affirmative. You have a net benefit that you're ready to defend. And all you got to win is, yeah, it's different, distinct from the F. And I think that tends to make them seem a lot more justified. Because obviously there's people who are like, I shouldn't have to defend every single thing in existence. Well, if you argue that you don't have to defend every single aspect of public college universities, you just have to defend all forms of constitutional protected speech or whatever it may be, then you set a narrower ground. So you say, well, look, in this case it's competitive, it's not always going to be. A case where I think this is very, very strategic is if you're debating someone who's wrote a plan, especially a very narrow plan, I think a very good combination to go for in those rounds, if available, is topicality plus a pick. Few reasons for this. First, I think if you're trying to do research for, say, a narrow plan or one that's otherwise unpredictable, like, I don't know, they conscript everybody into the Hunger Games. Okay, everyone at 220 needs to be part of the lottery to join the Hunger Games. And you're like, shoot, I have no research on Hunger Games are bad. Maybe you can argue that analytically, but supposing you really need research. If you're going for, say, a standard disadvantage, counterplan to solve the case, answers to the contention strategy, you're probably going to need a decent amount of research. You need to cut a DA, you need to cut case answers, you need some counterplan involved. But that's supposing that counterplan was a pick that agrees with the large majority of the affirmative case. Chances are all you need is 2 or 3 cards explaining that benefit, because you're going to solve pretty much all of the case. And so you find a card that says, here's one exception we should make to the Hunger Games. And you have that offense in your pick. You don't need a separate DA, that's your offense. You don't really need a lot of cards on solvents, you need a lot of case answers, because the counterplan is going to agree with the majority of the affirmative case, and so you're going to solve their advantage. And so I think it's helpful because if you're trying to prep out a specific plan, it often is a lower workload. Just find one specific exception to whatever they're saying, and then cut that. Secondly, I think it's much harder for someone who's read a plan, specifically a very narrow plan, to consistently object to whatever the pick is. So in theory, they say picks are bad, or they say this counterplan shouldn't be considered different enough from the plan to be competitive. And then you also read topicality. It's very hard to give that one arrow without contradicting yourself. Think about what they're going to say against topicality. You're like, you can't read this very specific plan. They're probably going to say something like, well, first off, going in depth on specific issues is very educational. It's more real world to discuss the details. And they're going to say, maybe there's a little bit of unfairness in the affirmative being able to pick any one of a specific large number of plans, but that's predictable, it's inevitable, etc. And education from discussing in-depth issues outweighs unfairness. And then now think about what they're going to have to say when they're arguing against the pick. They're going to have to say, well, hold on. You have a counterplan that goes in depth on a specific detail about my plan, but there's too many possible picks. I couldn't research the fairness concerns that way. Not logically possible, but those warrants start to run up against each other very strongly. So in the two and up, you take one direction or the other. Either if they're really going for picks bad, you just go for topicality and argue that outweighs until the warrants for the picks are bad. If they're arguing pretty persuasively on topicality that specification is justified in the grounds of education, then you have a very easy time winning that your counterplan is legitimate, and you just kick topicality and go for the counterplan. Other questions about picks? Okay. Yeah.
What's the difference between like picks and like truth testing?
That's a good question. So, actually, I might spend a minute on this because this isn't even relevant specifically to picks. I think this applies to a lot of counterplans. So, truth testing is one paradigm for evaluating around. And usually this conflicts with some other conception that, I don't know, here's things like plan focus or offense, defense, or comparing worlds. There's a lot of slight variations, but basically, on the one side, someone is saying, the way that you should evaluate the debate is just take the resolution, decide whether it's true or false. More likely true than false, AF wins. More likely false than true, neg wins. Alternatively, someone might say, you're comparing between two competing advocacies. And so decide what the affirmative advocacy is, decide what the negative advocacy is, choose which one is better. Often that includes a plan. And so they have to read a plan, and they'll say the focus of the debate is not this plan. Decide whether you should do it, or the agent of action should do this plan over a competitive policy, or whatever the topic is. So these are two very different competing paradigms for evaluating the debate round. Now, under any of these latter paradigms, plan, focus, offense, defense, comparing worlds, however you phrase them, counterplans clearly make sense because the AF has advocacy, and the negative is introducing their counterplan as a competitive advocacy that's different from the affirmative. And so now the judge has a choice, do the AF or do whatever this counterplan does. But perhaps it's a little bit less clear how a counterplan functions under a truth testing model. And that's your question, how do picks make sense? Yeah, go for it.
Because like picks, you're literally saying like, oh, we should do like this part of the app.
Mm-hmm.
Like, isn't that what truth testing is?
So, under truth testing, you would have to make an argument for the counterplan negates the truth of the resolution. And this applies under any paradigm. Remember, when you introduce a counterplan, that doesn't change what the resolution is. It's not like the text of the counterplan is the equivalent of a negative resolution. And the AF wins if they prove the resolution true. But the neg doesn't win just for proving the counterplan text true. Because at the end of the day, regardless of paradigm, regardless of whether there's a counterplan or not, the negative ultimately has to disprove the affirmative somehow. And so proving a counterplan true doesn't prove that you win. This is why permutation to both is an argument. The AF is going to say, yeah, your counterplan's good, but so is the AF. We should just do both of them. And they're going to point out that you haven't negated what the AF said. And so for a counterplan, you do need to prove competition, which is why it's distinct from the affirmative case. And so that's where things like mutual exclusivity, competition to net benefits come in. Because you're saying not only is my counterplan a good idea, but it also negates what you said because it shows there's a better option that you prevent us from taking. Now, on pretty much any resolution, the way the resolution is worded is as some sort of normative statement. Some agent should take some action. And so, given the nature of those resolutions, a counterplan typically will disprove the truth of that resolution. Like if I said, resolved, we should go to McDonald's. And you said, false, we should go to In-N-Out. I know you had some advantages about like getting food, wanting burgers and fries, but we could go to In-N-Out, get those burgers and fries, and they'd be better, and it wouldn't be as nasty. McDonald's has like rat meat in the burgers, and I don't want to eat rat meat, right? You not only offered a competitive advocacy, but if you're correct, then my statement is false. It is not true that we should go to McDonald's. Why? Well, because we should go to In-N-Out. Even if McDonald's is better than what we're currently doing, maybe this module is just useless and food is good. It's still the case that we should not go to McDonald's. What we should be doing is some other option. And so, in general, counterplans do make sense under truth testing because you're negating the truth of the resolution. You're saying it is false that we should take this action because it's a better action that we should take. So truth testing doesn't really undermine counterplans in general. Now, how does it apply to picks? Well, now this is going to go back to that competition question, which is, does the counterplan prove the resolution false? Take that same example from a second ago, college free speech. And the topic was worded, public colleges and universities ought not restrict any speech. Now assume the counterplan we said is second, where we said counterplan restrict hate speech. If colleges should restrict hate speech, you have a bunch of good evidence that this counterplan is a great idea. All colleges should institute this set of hate speech restrictions. Is it then true that colleges ought not restrict any speech? Yeah. Yes? I said yes. Why is that? So you're saying F is true?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so if you said, here's a restriction that we should do, we should restrict hate speech, then it is not true that colleges ought not restrict any speech. Because they should restrict hate speech. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you getting that now? Yeah. So you would have disproved that resolution because the resolution is like never do this, and you said false. Sometimes we do this. Now, obviously, in that earlier example, this argument might be persuasive, because the answer is like in general this is true, and then I'd be like, but for this one specific college it isn't. And in that context, you're right. It would not seem to disprove the truth of the resolution. If you're just like Governor State University should not have constitutionally protected speech. And you're going to say, well, that still affirms the resolution because you've also said, in general, this is true. And so, usually it's going to come down to the same question as the earlier competition question, which is, AF asserted that the resolution is true. It's a negative argument, competitive with that. It still affirms the truth of the resolution, and that's the question. Now, usually, the place where this might get a little bit murky is, they introduce a specific plan. And then you introduce another counterplan that, although distinct from the plan, also affirms the topic. Not immediately thinking of a good example from an LD resolution. So suppose the resolution was like, resolved, the U.S. should impose a policy to solve climate change. And you were like, the United States should accede to the Paris Agreement to solve climate change. And the negative says, counterplan, the United States should implement a cap-and-trade scheme to solve climate change. And you argue that's better, and for whatever reason, acceding to Paris is better. Both of these are from the resolution, right? Resolution is like, we should pass some sort of policy to solve climate change. Usually what we argue is, if the affirmative is reading a plan that says, my advocacy is this plan, then that assumes some sort of plan-focused model of the debate, where the negative burden is not to disprove the resolution as a whole, it's to disprove whatever the affirmative plan was. And if the negative doesn't like that, it should be topicality and say this plan is unacceptable. And so, in that sense, the argument seems justified on the grounds of, if here's the whole resolution, and the ad says, I'm only going to defend this plan, and I don't defend any other part of the resolution, you can't win disadvantage to that part of the resolution because those aren't part of my advocacy. Then there might seem something unfair with the negative saying, or sorry, with the ad saying, but also, you don't have this ground either. I'm not going to defend it. You can't claim it's bad, but it's still mine. And so you can't have this counterplan. And so usually, if the app is saying, I only defend this, and the negative says, well, we should do this instead, there's a decent argument for, yeah, it still negates, because the focus of the debate should now just be this one thing the affirmative said. Now, I could think of exceptions, like supposing you had a plan and also explicitly justified like a truth testing paradigm, and you argued the plan was just like an example that proved the resolution true. Like supposing you interpret a resolution as like any one or more of the following is true. That we should have a draft, compulsory community service, or any other form of national service. And then you said, I've sufficiently proven this true by showing that a draft is a good idea. And then the negative shows we should do compulsory community service, something like that. You'd say, well, that still proves the resolution true. Although that's a little bit weird, because in that case, you wouldn't really be defending the plan per se, you'd be defending the resolution using the plan as an example. And I'd say I don't really see people do that very often. And so I would just say, in general, assume that they wrote a plan. Usually that just means your burden is now just to negate the plan. So even if they kind of otherwise affirm the topic, it's fine. And those are referred to as topical counterplans. Good question. Other questions about this? Cool. Other types of counterplans. Let me see how we're doing. Second. Anyone familiar with uniqueness counterplans? You want to explain it?
The status quo is already going to be something which they use as a counterplan against.
No. So you could argue status quo solves your affirmative, and I guess in a sense it's like counterplan do nothing. But I don't think you really need to read a counterplan for that, because you already presumptively defending the status quo as the negative. And so you make status quo solves arguments without adding anything or claiming to change the world in any way. And if you have this, like in the status quo, we're likely to do this thing. And that would be fine. That's a good argument, but it's not what I'm referring to by uniqueness counterplan. So uniqueness counterplan is just a counterplan to generate uniqueness for some DA or offense for you. So, for example, let's say on the nuclear power topic, did y'all debate that?
Yeah.
Pretty much all y'all did? Okay. So on the nuclear power topic, the app said prohibit nuclear power. And so on that topic, the negative might want to read a DA that's about a specific type of nuclear power. You've got really good cards. Thorium is just the best thing ever. And we need thorium reactors. Now let's assume maybe you don't even have any authors that says thorium is particularly safer or less prone to meltdown or anything like that as compared to uranium or other forms of reactor. But you do have really good evidence that thorium is just like super good for the economy, it's super efficient, super cheap, and that your econ disadvantage is going to be much, much stronger in the context of using thorium reactors. So you read a counterplan that says the United States should invest in or do R&D for or whatever thorium reactors, and claim that's going to lead to thorium reactors, and then read a DA that says thorium reactors are good. And maybe this counterplan doesn't solve the case at all. Maybe thorium has exactly as many problems as uranium does, but it could still be strategic because it means now you get all this offense that says thorium is really good. Usually these counterplans go in the exact opposite direction of the resolution. Because if your counterplan was just do this thing is good, what's the app going to say? Yeah, firm do both. Like app is good, your thing's also good, let's do it. So usually these arguments make sense when it's something that's mutually exclusive with the resolution. You're saying, we're not currently going to develop thorium, but we should develop thorium. The app can't take that stance because the app prohibits nuclear power. If you argue thorium is good, and now you've got offense. Or let's say, a common trick on the app, I think, on that topic was to say something like, nuclear power plants are inevitably closing. They're shutting down, they're economically uncompetitive. And so the negative impact is inevitable long term anyway, because reactors are just going to shut down. And so there's only a risk of the app offense. The neg can't maintain like long-term economic stability of nuclear power. How might a counterplan resolve that argument? Then it's like all your DAs are non-unique because power plants are shutting down inevitably. Anybody? Yeah.
Maintenance time, how do you increase the results?
Yeah, or even just maintain the current ones, right? If their argument is they're all going to shut down, you say counterplan, do something to prevent them from shutting down, financial subsidies or some other incentive. That would make sense. You'd have solved that problem. Because their objection was just, we're not going to do this. And you're like, yeah. But now you also might want to counterplan to increase nuclear power plants. In fact, I thought that made a lot of sense on that topic. Because there was a lot of good literature that said nuclear power plants would keep the globe warming. Y'all probably saw that plenty of times. But pretty much every single person who wrote the nuclear power keeps the globe warming also specifically said, we currently don't have remotely enough power plants to solve warming. So I think reading that warming argument as just a DA ended up being relatively weak. Because the app had a very strong press that was just like, yeah, even if theoretically nuclear power plants solve warming, and obviously nuclear would be the way to solve warming, we're not currently increasing power plants almost anywhere. China's one of the only countries right now that is. And there's no way we're going to have enough power plants online to do what your authors assume. So as a DA, it lacked a bit of uniqueness. As a counterplan to increase nuclear power, now, to be fair, that counterplan actively links even harder to all the app arguments, most likely. Because they're like, nuclear power plants are bad, and you're like, let's do even more of them. But the advantage of that counterplan is a very strong warming net benefit. Even if the current amount of nuclear power doesn't solve, a large amount of nuclear power could. You guys follow this? Cool. Another example, counterplans. Various process counterplans. There's a lot of these. Anyone want to suggest one or two? Didn't think so. That's correct. So, example of process counterplans. The delay counterplan. Do the F just a little bit later, not right now. The sunset counterplan. Do the F until a later time and have the F naturally expire. Do the F if and only if we consult some other actor and they say yes. That's the consult counterplan. So like for some international topic, you'd be like, the US should consult Japan. And if Japan says go ahead, then we do it. Regneg, which is have a regulatory negotiation about the counterplan. There's a lot of these. Regneg, R-E-G-N-E-G. That's not a debate term. You can Google it and you'll find like what regneg is if you want more information. But it's like we should have negotiated rulemaking and then decide as a basis on that process what we should do. So in general, these are all counterplans that change the app a very minor degree and say doing it this slightly different process will be better. What do you think is in general the best answer to these counterplans? Yeah.
Theory?
Yeah, I mean theory is a good answer. Although specifically I think one argument is probably an even stronger answer. Yeah. Not quite. Because you do something like do the F now and then do the F later. Saying do the F now and later is just what the F is saying already. So that was close. Yeah, it's on the board. Yeah, permanent to the counterplan. If you said the United States should pass a draft, and they're like, no. You guys should pass a draft next week. I think a very strong argument is, when I said you should pass a draft, I didn't mean like literally right now. Congress should just like reconvene and immediately pass a draft. I just meant in general they should pass a draft. And so you might argue that something like a delay counterplan is not competitive with what you were saying. And so you'd argue that that counterplan is no different from the affirmative. Or if their counterplan was something like, do this slightly different process and then do the F, you could say, well, if it ultimately results in the affirmative case happening, it's still the affirmative, even if you tacked on a process. Yes? Yeah, so usually there's these arguments back and forth, like the negative will define a bunch of terms, and they'll be like, insert term should or ought or resolve or something implies 100% certainty and immediacy. And so the counterplan is any less than that, then it's competitive. And that's the negative version of the argument, yes. And then usually, the argument here is probably going to be somewhat theoretical in nature as to why you prefer your interpretation of what the resolution is. And you might want to say, well, the F shouldn't be tied to defending absolute immediacy or 100% certainty because it justifies like unlimited number of very tricky counterplans. But yeah, that is the argument they would make for why this is competitive. It's usually they're going to say that has to be 100% likely to happen. A counterplan is only very likely to happen, so it's different. And yeah.
Would process CPs include something like Friday CPs?
What?
Like only do the app, but do it on like a Friday.
Does it pass the app on Friday or only implement the app on
Only
Friday?
implement the app.
Interesting.
But I heard those before,
I guess that sounds more like a pick that only does like what 1/7 of the F. Interesting argument. Now, if you're kind of like past the F this Friday, then I'd say it's more like a process counterplan. It's usually like, do whatever the thing is via some different process to get it done. These arguments, very commonly, the net benefit to this is a politics disadvantage that says whatever this process is goes through some sort of different political scheme or in some other way avoids political controversy. So they'll say, do the app in a month or so, because right now we're debating healthcare, and this plan would disrupt the healthcare debates. Or they'll say, do the app through, regneg, but it's less politically controversial, gets more people on board, something like that. And they'll say, here's a politics disadvantage. Your app is politically unpopular, and that's going to undermine some bill or some other aspect of politics. Maybe there's an election going on. And so, in addition to entering the counterplan, any offense in the DA is also going to be offense in the counterplan. And so one thing I would suggest when you're hitting one of these types of counterplans, a pick or like a process counterplan, is generate offense versus the net benefit. Because they can win and it solves 100% of the case. But if you turn the net benefit, you still win. Impact, turn it, do whatever. Makes the whole argument moot. Because the whole point of the counterplan is to solve your app. But if you solve offense in the DA, that's also a very good answer. And you can also read theory, like she was saying. Even if these counterplans are theoretically different from the affirmative, they might still be abusive or unfair. And so you also see theory against many of those process counterplans. Other questions about these? Yeah, I'd say it. And to be clear, conditions, not conditional counterplans.
Yeah. Conditional.
If anyone's less familiar with the term. So if you're like condition the app on something, or some sort of condition, then yeah, that would be some minor technical change in process. Conditional counterplans obviously is a whole different can of worms. Agent counterplans. I suppose we start with this.
I was wondering if that was under process.
Oh no, we should mention it. Agent counterplans. So agent counterplan is just different agent of action should do whatever the affirmative is. So for example, the topic was the United States should promote democracy in the Middle East. The neighbor says not. India should promote democracy in the Middle East. Because India would solve better. Anyone seen one of these run in some round?
Yeah.
Really? Which topic? Okay, so the democracy promotion topic? Yeah, I don't think any of the topics in the past few years have been too conducive, and that's the last one that comes to mind. I don't think these are going to make any goddamn sense. Yeah, 50 states is another example of any kind of plan. So the app says federal government should do a thing. The neg says all 50 states should just simultaneously do that same thing instead of the federal government. It's already 9:40, so I don't know that we have time to go in depth on this. But safe to say, I think there's some very strong logical and theoretical objections to the agent counterplan. Next off, advantage counterplans? Who's familiar with these? I want to define it real quick. Good. Yep. So an advantage counterplan only has one function. Here's another way to solve the asked advantage. So let's say you say the United States should do insert resolution to get it solved global warming. And the negative says, here's some other means to solve global warming. E.g., build a bunch of new nuclear reactors. If the app was cap and trade, and the negative was like fund a bunch of nuclear reactors, they're going to say, well, we could pass cap and trade, but that has some sort of harm to it, maybe the econ DA. And then they say, well, instead we should solve warming by building a bunch of nuclear reactors, and that would also solve warming, but it would be less economically harmful. The only function of that counterplan is just to solve the affirmative advantage. The counterplan, they already got card or two that says nuclear power solves warming. And on its own, all the counterplan is essentially is just defense against the advantage. It's just saying, here's another way to solve this advantage, so the affirmative isn't necessary. The offense from the counterplan is going to come from whatever the offense against the app is, usually a DA. Now, occasionally, a strategy that I find very useful is if they have, say, two contingents. One is maybe warming, one is hegemony. You need an advantage counterplan to solve one of them. Straight turn the other one. Or head bad 5 minutes. And now the advantage, or the net benefit to the advantage counterplan, is just that it doesn't solve the other advantage, the one you've impact turned. App solves both advantages. The neck solves only the advantage that's not impact turned or link turned. And so now the net benefit becomes, it doesn't solve the impact turned advantage. And so I think that's often a very good combination. Advantage counterplan plus a straight turn to another advantage. But what you're going to say is, it doesn't really matter whether nuclear war, let's say you won, that nuclear power solves warming even better than a carbon tax. That on its own doesn't do a whole lot for you, because even if the counterplan solves better than the affirmative, the app could just say, perm do both on the advantage counterplan, and then the permutation would definitely solve warming, because it solves at least as well as the counterplan does. Because advantage counterplans are very, very rarely mutually exclusive. It's just do some other random thing to solve. So the fact that it solves better doesn't really help very much. Even if when your counterplan is like 10 times better, it doesn't matter, because the permutation will still access that. So it won't be offense against doing both of them. And so what you need is a disadvantage as well, or say an impact turn the counterplan avoids. And this is based on the difference between what two types of net benefits. Anybody know? No?
Internal.
Yeah. Internal and external net benefits. So, an internal net benefit is a reason the counterplan is a good idea. An external net benefit is a reason the app advocacy is a bad idea. So, if the resolution was resolved, we should go to McDonald's, and you present the internet counterplan, an internal net benefit would be something like, internet has animal fries, and I really like animal fries. An external net benefit would be something like, McDonald's has rat meat in its burgers. And the external net benefit, remember, it's a DA to the affirmative, but it's got to be one that doesn't apply just as much to the counterplan. So if the disadvantage was like, I hate burgers, let's go to In-N-Out. Wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So external net benefit would be a problem with the app that doesn't apply to the counterplan. So you got to make sure when you're reading a counterplan with a DA, that your DA does not link to that counterplan. You're planning on going with it. So internal net benefits, reason the counterplan is good. External net benefit, reason the counterplan is bad. Two concepts where this is relevant. One, conditionality. Let's say you have a counterplan and you decide to kick it. You kick the counterplan, and internal net benefit of the counterplan is no longer relevant. So you said we should do this thing because it has this advantage to it, but now I'm not going to do that thing anymore. So you can't get that advantage. But if you got a counterplan where the net benefit was external, where the net benefit was just a problem with the app, you could conceivably kick the counterplan and then still go for that net benefit as a disadvantage to the app. Like sometimes the net external benefit will just be a disadvantage. And so occasionally you'll see something like the neg reads a pick and says this specific problem the app has a harm with it. And the 2NR, maybe they kick the pick. They're like, I'm not defending the pick proper anymore. But the net benefit of the pick is still a disadvantage to the app because I said the app does this specific thing and it has a harm to it. So it's external to the counterplan. You can still go for it independently. So external net benefits can still be relevant even if the app or even if the negative kicks the counterplan. And then secondly, external net benefits tend to be better offense against permutation do both. Because if you just have a reason the counterplan is good, and they say permutation do the app and the negative, anything that was good about the neg advocacy is going to be part of the permutation. The permutation can be good for the same reason. But if you said, here's an external benefit, a harm to the affirmative that the counterplan avoids, and they say do both the app and the counterplan, permutation is probably going to include that harm. There's a harm to the app, and then app is not saying do the app and the neg. And so that doing both is still going to include that harm. So external net benefits tend to be better offense against perm do both. And so usually you see internal net benefits when the counterplan is something mutually exclusive, like a uniqueness counterplan will have an internal net benefit, right? Build thorium reactors because thorium has some benefit to it. And then the answer to perm do both is just you can't do both. External net benefits tend to jive better, or there's no harm with having external net benefit to any of these, but external net benefits clearly are better when the counterplan is not at all mutually exclusive, like an advantage counterplan. So you can't just say counterplan sells super well, therefore do the counterplan instead of the app. Because the app can say, well, why don't we do both? It'll sell doubly well. Or you can't say advantage counterplan, do this random thing. By the way, it also solves other impact. That's not going to be offense either, because they're going to say just do the advantage counterplan to solve that other impact. And so the advantage counterplan on its own will just be defense. If there's any offense to it, like why it's good, will be garnered by the permutation. And so what you need is an advantage counterplan and then a DA that doesn't link to the advantage counterplan. So, in this example we had a second ago, counterplan nuclear power with an econ DA versus capital trade. The app might say, hold on a second, building a ton of new nuclear power plants subsidized by the government would also be a massive drain on the economy. And that would be a good app challenge because they're saying your counterplan links to your DA. The external net benefit isn't actually a benefit to your counterplan at all. So counterplan links to the DA, pretty common, pretty strong argument in this context. Now, another thing about advantage counterplans relevant to this is they tend to work much better against brink impacts than linear impacts. If the app advantage, raise your hand if you've never seen the cliff analogy before for disadvantages. You never have?
Never.
I know you're lying. You're in my lab. All right. So the app has some brink. You're like, we're currently on the road. If you're the app, you're like, we're probably falling off the cliff now. And the app does something to push us back one. And so an advantage counterplan would say something like, do some other thing to push us back one. And what you're going to want to say is, even if doing both would push us like super, super far back onto the cliff, like the combination of the two would put us way over here, we don't really need to be super far onto the cliff. We just need to be on the cliff. And so there's no benefit to doing both the plan and the counterplan over just the counterplan. Like, if the problem was to say the military needed $100 billion more dollars, and you had a counterplan that got them $100 billion more dollars, and the app had an app that gave them $100 billion more dollars, they might say, turn to do both, and the military has a huge amount of money, but you're going to say, well, all I needed to make sure their budget was fine was like $100 billion, so having double the money doesn't have the same benefit. Maybe there's some marginal offense, but not substantial. Or if the app scenario was a war, like app key to prevent war, and you have another counterplan that also prevents that same war from happening, we can't double prevent a war. It either happens or it doesn't. So if the counterplan solves war, or whatever the war scenario is, it solves the affirmative case. And usually the framing you'll hear here in the NR will be the term sufficiency. Anyone heard this before? So the 2NR is going to argue that the counterplan is sufficient to solve the advantage. It doesn't need to solve 100%. It doesn't need to solve exactly as well as the app does. Maybe it solves better, maybe it solves a little bit worse. But as long as it's sufficient to put you back on the cliff, that's fine. You don't need to be doubly on the cliff. You don't need to be super far on the cliff. You just need to be not falling off the edge. Maybe you'd be perfectly fine near the edge of the cliff where you can see the view as long as you're not falling off. And so the counterplan is sufficient to solve the affirmative. And there's no important difference between the counterplan and the plan in terms of solvency. That doesn't make as much sense whether you're a linear advantage. Let's say the advantage is like the app reduces disease or poverty or inequality or something like that. In this context, the app says something like, I lift 10,000 people out of poverty. And the neg says, I lift 10,000 people out of poverty via some other counterplan. If the app says, well, hey, why don't we do both of those? Let's do both of these things, lift 20,000 people out of poverty. The same frame isn't going to make a whole lot of sense. You can't be like, nah, we only really needed to get 10,000 people out of poverty. There's no additional benefit to getting 10,000 more people out of poverty. So the counterplan is sufficient. It makes a lot less sense here, because wherever you are, maybe the app pushes this up a little, the counterplan pushes this up a little, but permutation to do both, presumably, is going to have a huge benefit to it. And so you might do something like perm that gets double solvency. And so perm do both, double solvency, common argument, versus an advantage counterplan if the advantage were linear. You just like, app solves 10,000 cases of disease by instituting single-payer healthcare. And the neg says counterplan reform meal choice in cafeterias to solve obesity. Both of these solve an equal amount of healthcare problems. The app is going to be like, well, why don't we do both of those? We solve twice as many healthcare problems. And you'll notice here that the counterplan, theoretically, might end up not doing anything for you at all. If in the status quo, we're solving 0 cases of disease, the app solves, say, 10,000, maybe the neg counterplan is even better than the app and solves like 15,000. A perm ends up solving 25,000 cases of disease or healthcare problems. And now compare where the neg was before the counterplan. Difference between status quo and the app was 10,000. Now where's the negative after the counterplan if the app makes a permutation? Difference of 10,000. So counterplan might end up not doing anything at all, really, against the advantage. Because when it's linear, the answer is, well, the more the better. You do your counterplan, we do our app, let's combine them and solve twice as much. And you still have the same net difference, 10,000 more lives saved in the little affirmative. Same amount of offense. You actually haven't mitigated it in the slightest. But that's not always true. You know, sometimes maybe they might solve the exact same internal link that you do. So let's say they solve poverty for, they reduce poverty by giving low-wage workers a more stable source of income, e.g., a living wage. That was a topic from not too long ago. AF says United States federal government should have a living wage. Everyone gets at least $15 an hour, and that solves the problem. One counterplan on that topic was something like this. Institute a wage subsidy, where if the company pays you less than $15 an hour, the government will pay the rest. So you end up getting $15 an hour regardless. The counterplan is different from the AF. Now the AF has linear net benefit, solves poverty. But that counterplan ends up solving poverty in pretty much exactly the same way as the AF. Each individual worker gets about $15 an hour at minimum. In one case it was from the government, in one case it was from private corporations. And then we did DA, that's like, if you put the burden on the corporations, that hurts the economy a lot more. It'd be better for the government to pick up the slack. In that case, you know, it wasn't like AF solves 10,000, neg solves 10,000. It was more like AF solves 10,000, negative solves pretty much exactly the same 10,000. So doing both might be slightly better, but it ends up being pretty much 100% overlap. This is probably the exception to that rule. If you can solve the exact same internal link, so you're solving the same the same 10,000 cases of disease or the same 10,000 cases of poverty, they don't make sense. But in general, it's much harder to win an advantage counterplan versus a linear advantage. Any ambiguity on this? All right. How much time do we have left? Ooh, it's already 9:55. Any final questions before we dismiss? Yeah, go for it.
Could you also do this how to respond to it, the best strategy against it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the 50 states counterplan, just be like, yeah, I guess anyone who doesn't want to answer this, feel free to leave so you get to your module. But they're going to say different agents should do the F. I think the best answer to it is just, this argument does not make any sense. Not a lot of opportunity cost to the affirmative. The app has said, US should do this, it's the best of US's options. It is not a possible real option for the United States federal government to make the 50 states do anything. It's not within the scope of the limited opportunity costs. And in 5 minutes after we can discuss that in more depth if you want. That's the Spartans version. Beyond that, you're probably just going to want to follow the same line of reasoning that you would with any other counterplan. So generate a solvency deficit. Why don't the states solve as well as the app does? Then you're going to want to say opt-in against the counterplan, e.g. turn the net benefit. If the net benefit is politics, link or impact turn the politics disadvantage. There's also going to be offense against the counterplan insofar as the counterplan doesn't link to the DA and you do. So if linking to the DA is good, that'll be offense for you. Permutation, do both. And then theory.